Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. So now we've reached the last part of Surah Al-Fatiha. We've been reading from Tafsir Al-Qurtubi. So we're at the ayah صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم. We covered part of this last time, but we wanted to review this before going forward and closing off. It's not going to be a very long class, given that we're almost at the end. But here, the tafsir is indicating that the sirat, or the path that's mentioned here, صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم, of those who Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala has blessed, is the same path that we're asking to be upon when we say اهدنا الصراط المستقيم. But one of the things that's important to understand here is this principle that a person can be guided to the path and then prevented from going on it. And that's one of the reasons why Surah Al-Fatiha is considered not only to be revelation from the Quran, but there's an aspect of it which is dua. There's an aspect of it which is dua. And it's a model for dua. It's a model for how dua should be practiced. Here, specifically, is showing us that we're depending upon Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, even though we have a sense of choice. Our choice is limited. And some of that discussion comes up in the tafsir itself. I think that sometimes what happens with this is it becomes too academic. It becomes too academic. The debates in over the Quran, it becomes very problematic when it becomes too academic or even sectarian, because the Quran is supposed to be above all of that debate. And sometimes that's one of the limitations in Islamic scholarship, that if it goes to one side too far, then the Quran is turned into a sectarian text to justify this group or that group. When the Quran didn't come to justify this group or that group, the Quran came to build up an ummah out of all of the people that have their issues. Even in this case, the case of the people who Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala has given the blessing to, those people came out of shirk. Initially, if we want to talk about the group of the Sahaba. And whoever from the people of the book came in is the same thing. So if it was the case that is just proving that we're right and they're wrong and that's it, there would be no da'wah aspect at all. There would be no invitation. There would be no presentation that there's another route for people to live. And even that's the issue that comes up here. So that's the principle that we want to remain on, that someone may be guided to the path and then prevented from going on it. And I had a teacher, I mentioned this before, from the ulama of Azhar, may Allah extend his life, Qazbi Zalat, who's from the ulama of Tafsir. He said that we always read the Quran from the angle of applying it on ourselves, not applying it to these people or other people outside of ourselves. So we look at the sifat, or the characteristics that are there in the Quran, whatever those sifat may be, be indicating to, whether it's nifaq or kufr, or whether it's iman or ihsan, whatever it may be. And we ask ourselves, we use the Quran as a mirror to look and reflect upon ourselves to see what kind of qualities that we have. Versus we take the Quran ayah by ayah and we're saying this group and that group and this. That's not going to benefit us if we think that we're secure. And that's not the meaning here. That the meaning here is not that we're not secure. That's the meaning. The meaning is not that we're secure. The meaning is that we're not secure. That in our journey through the dunya, we're constantly depending upon Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala to guide us through. And that's how the Sahaba were, radiyallahu anhum ajma'in. They even sometimes used to accuse themselves of being from the people of nifaq. They used to worry that if they gained qabul from Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, they gained acceptance from Allah. So even here, this is what we call sometimes the excess of the ulama Meaning that, here is even clear. People disagree. They're talking about the ulama, about the identity of those who are blessed. Right? We know some of the characteristics. So, but then he says the majority of the ulama of tafsir, they say that it means the prophets, the people of haqq, the shuhada, and the salihin. Right? And they come up with their understanding by looking at other ayat of the Quran. Like the ayat that's in Surah An-Nisa, whoever obeys Allah and the messenger will be with those whom Allah has blessed. The prophets are the true, the martyrs and the righteous. And that's a good tafsir. The good tafsir is to understand the Quran with the Quran, understand the Quran with the Arabic language, understand the Quran with the ahadith. Although even sometimes with the ahadith, you have to be careful how you utilize them. The ahadith have to be properly understood first. Aside from the issue of the ahadith being sound, the ahadith have to be properly understood. Yes?
When you say properly understood, that means you have to know the Arabic well, or is it like, you have to have a tafsir of ahadith bias before you...
The issue with the ayat of the Quran and the ahadith, the Quran, they say ذو وجهين, ذو وجوه, ذو وجوه. The Quran is an ocean, and part of the issue, I didn't even get into that. They're like this: there's 10 readings of the word alayhim, right? Alayhimu, alayhumu, alayhumu, right? That doesn't make sense if you don't have the Arabic with you. It doesn't make sense if you don't have the Arabic with you. But because in the later days, these times that we're living in, most of us are distant from the Arabic. Even those who study the Arabic language, those of us who study, we still have a lot of weakness. Because the way that the ulama studied in the past, they had not only the Arabic language, they had the qira'at. So you can have was understood in the language of the Arabs, and then what was read in the time period of the earliest generation. And they read the Quran in different ways. The Mus'haf that we have now, it was like the mediator between the different recitations, right? In writing, because remember that the Quran is not only oral, is not only written, it's also oral. And so, for instance, that was a process. The Quran coming into a written form was a process, and it was always memorized along with the qira'at, or the different modes of recitation. It was never a book orientation solely. That came later. So you had the Arabic language with all of its depth. And this is not to make it complicated, but it is reality is what it is. And then you have the qira'at. And so we've become accustomed to reading the Quran one way without real understanding. So there's things in the Quran that are clear and not open to understandings, and there's things that are open to understandings. So just like here, he says, Imam Qurtubi, he said they disagree about the identity of those who are blessed. He just gives you the majority position. The hadith is the same thing. There will be ahadith which are clear and ahadith which are the ulama have a discussion. I don't want to say debate. They have discussions around the ahadith on what it means. So with the issue of sometimes the ulama, like Imam al-Suyuti and Dur Manthur, it's a big collection of tafsir, but what he did was he just jam-packed a lot of ahadith. Sometimes those ahadith need to be verified. They need to be, first of all, we need to see if they're sound or not sound. The debates around that, then we need to see, what the meanings are. So the issue becomes that sometimes the Quran can be open to more than one meaning, and then sometimes we will lock down the meaning with the hadith. You see what I'm saying, or no? Or sometimes the hadith is open to multiple meanings and we just select one meaning and we say this is it. No, that's not scholarship. Right? Like in this, it comes up that غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. We have a hadith which says that that's the people of the book. So do we claim that we're the ones, like we're the chosen people? Do we claim that we're the ones that are blessed? When here just is telling us someone may be guided to the path and prevented from going on it. There's no guarantee in that. You see what I'm saying? So yeah, we have an understanding of the sifat of those who go astray and those who gain the anger of Allah. But to just say that this is the only group, then what about the Muslims who gain the anger of Allah? What about the people who come into Islam and they go astray? So we have to understand the hadith correctly when we apply. It's important. You get what I'm saying or no?
Are you referring to this mutashabat or ghayr mutashabihat? Is that the one?
It's similar in that regard. That what that's saying is basically the concept there is that there's things that are clear in the Quran and things that are open to understanding, right?
Yeah.
But when you make tafsir of the Quran, some people make tafsir of the Quran. They take a hadith and they say this hadith is what it means and that's it, and they limit the meaning. If we're gonna, like for instance in the hadith, like we're already clear that one tafsir for an'amta alayhim is the prophets, the shuhada, like the salihin. That's one tafsir. Imam Qurtubi tells us that some of the ulama have other understandings for that, so we leave it. But then when it comes to the issue here, of those who have, who are from the Dalin and those who have gained the ghadab of Allah, those who are astray and those who have gained the anger of Allah. Here it says the majority say that those with anger on them are the Jews and the misguided are the Christians. And then it says that was explained by the Prophet ﷺ in the hadith of Adi bin Hatim and the story of how he became Muslim, transmitted by Abu Dawud. Okay, if we're going to say we're taking this hadith and we're saying that this ayah of the Quran is understood in light of this hadith, if people already gained the anger of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala and they're misguided, why even make da'wat to them? Why make da'wah to them? So that's why we say we have to understand the hadith properly. Is the hadith telling us that these characteristics are what lead us astray? Or is the hadith telling us that it's just this group that's astray and we're okay? You get what I'm saying or no? Because we have ayah of the Quran. We have ayah of the Quran, Ya Ahl al-Kitab ta'alu ila kalimatin siwa. إلى كلمة سوى بيننا وبينكم ألا نعبد إلا الله ولا نشرك به شيئا. We have an ayah of the Quran which says, "O people of the book, let's come to a common ground between us." Right? Let's come to a common ground in this specific, to a word which is the declaration of faith. Right? That we shouldn't worship anything other than Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala and not commit shirk. So now the ayah of the Quran gives us a different understanding of how we deal with this. It's not that we're condemning a group, it's that we're condemning certain practices and we're saying now it's open to a discussion between us and other people. Right? There is a common ground, enough of a common ground for us to say, look, You have a basis, we have a basis, right? And so let's make sure that we're clear on that basis. Like, let's return back to our roots. You get what I'm saying or no? Sometimes I've seen this type of thing. I put it to you very clearly. I've seen some people read this type of tafsir. They have mothers, grandmothers, cousins that are from the people of the book. They just condemn them as the people of shirk. They separate the family out. People of shirk, people of iman. You know what I'm saying? We have some Muslim brothers that's how they operate. They're not in that. They're not in the mode of education. They're not in the mode of تعالوا إلى كلمة سواء that the Quran is saying. Let's come to a common ground. We have to live with people. You see what I'm saying? At the end of the day, you can't force, or else you get what you have in India. You know, you can't force people at the level of iman, that level of ikrah. There's going to be differences between us. Yeah, we have discussions in the fiqh about whether Ahl al-Kitab is najis or not, about whether they're najis, about whether they're, if some people take that to the extreme, it's like you begin to dehumanize other people. That's why I said we have to, it's not just that we say, oh, the hadith makes it clear, and that's it. No, we have to make sure that we understood it properly, in its proper place, in the bigger picture, in the function of nubuwah, respecting people's dignity. You understand what I'm saying? If we're saying that we're on the straight path, and we have that understanding that, yeah, I'm a Muslim and I'm on the haqq, is that the meaning that we get from an'amta alayhim? Or the meaning that we get is that, we want to be with those people, we're desired to be with those people. You understand what I'm saying? And there's a possibility that we can go astray or even gain Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala's anger. That's why I mentioned that principle where the teacher said we should apply this to ourselves first rather than putting it on the groups out there like we're okay. See what I'm saying? Then you create a world which is very sectarian, and the Muslim has no place of, what are you bringing to the table? If everybody's going to hell and you're not going to hell, what are we bringing to the table?
So this tafsir is kind of like gives you another opinion too. I mean, they don't just lock down that okay.
Look,
The last sentence is about Jewish and Christianity.
yeah, look at what he says. It is said that those with anger on them are the idolaters, and the misguided are the hypocrites. It is said that those with anger on them are those who omit the obligation of reciting the surah and the salah. And then they debate about that. No, that's why we said we're trying to keep it simple. But the reason for using this tafsir, deviating from the tafhim or making it part of the tafhim, is that you have to reflect upon what's going on. You have to reflect upon what's going on in the environment of the surah, in the environment of the ayat. And you have a basis, you have a starting point. You're not guessing. You have the hadith, which is a basis. But that's why I say, how do you understand the hadith properly? It has to be understood in light of how the Prophet dealt with people. See what I'm saying? There's a lot of other issues that come along with this. Like marrying into the people of the book. Like doing business transactions with the people of the book. Coexisting with the people of the book. You know what I'm saying? That there's a lot of, how do you deal with that stuff? And that's where a lot of times we fall short. We begin to clash. If they're the ones that are misguided, and the anger of Allah is upon them, and we're right, and that's only it, that doesn't take us to any other level. But if we say from the angle, no, that we don't, there's a part of their belief that we can't accept. That's different. Versus condemning a group. We're talking about the belief. We're condemning the belief, not the people. You see what I'm saying? We have to be careful not to dehumanize, because we're living in a time period of dehumanization, and we don't want to participate in that, because look, that's what they're doing to us right now. Every other week there's some sort of hate crime killing in this country now. Every other week is like that. Germany, Australia, That's how it is. That's the path. And so with that attitude, that's just going to lead to, a clash of people on a very violent level. And we're seeing that.
The reverse discrimination. I even heard that one Jewish lady was commenting as well. They painting with the broad brushing of everybody. All the Jews are like that, but a lot of them are good people.
That's the point. That's the point of saying that understanding the hadith in its proper place. That's the point of saying that. Yeah, we have an issue. Look, I know Christians who don't believe that Isa is Allah.
Yeah, my supervisor is like that.
They go to the church. They do, they participate, but they don't believe that. You know what I'm saying? But at the core, we have a clear belief. So there's a clear belief there. We know what's there. The issue is the core issue is just not to dehumanize people. That's why the Sunnah, the seerah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the life of the Prophet is important to understand the Quran, how he dealt with people. Right? It's not just ideas or you see what I'm saying. If you don't see the compassion of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and you don't see how he dealt with people or the Anbiya in general, then you just get his condemnation. People are shirk, this, that. This has led to a lot of fitna. It has led to a lot of fitna. It has, and that's the fitna of takfir in the Muslim world. That's not that to say that takfir is not a principle in the deen. To say that a person is a kafir and have proof for it is part of Islam. But the problem is, how do you deal with people in general? And we have layers of this. The issue of coexistence, the internal issues amongst the Muslims themselves, like sectarian issues. The sectarian issues have led to the people killing each other. That's where we're at. Yeah, and then when the political stuff comes in, it gets worse. We have whole countries that have been destroyed over that stuff. That's why I said putting the hadith in its proper place, not just taking the hadith in a way which it deviates from the example of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Or from other ayat of the Quran. From other ayat of the Quran. We have other texts which indicate that the most close to us of the people of the book is the Nasara. We have texts that indicate, that the humility of some of their leadership. You know what I'm saying? So and then the Prophet ﷺ intermarried with them. That's why the question becomes, are we in a position of da'wah? And what are we contributing back to the world? That's the point. And this is not, it's like some people say, like some of the ulama, they say, when you're in a position of weakness, then all of a sudden you want to be friends with everybody. And when you're in a position of strength, then all of a sudden the sword comes out. That's the minhaj, that's the approach. Some of the scholars, they bring that out. They say, nah, that's not the approach. Right? We're living in this society, whether we like it or not, we have to coexist. How are you going to coexist with your neighbors if the only thing that comes to your mind is not the humanity, but how wrong they are? That's the only thing that comes to your mind. And then we never look at ourselves. You see what I'm saying? So the Quran, tells us that there's a path that we have to go on. And there's other issues. Like, what about if the message doesn't reach? What about if the message that they got about Islam is not even clear? Do you condemn them? Ulama, they call the people Ahl al-Fitra, they're in between prophets. Some of the scholars have gone to an extreme where they say, well, it's their obligation to go search. Do you think majority of the people understand Islam? It's a real question. Do you think majority of the people understand Islam? Do you think the Muslims understand Islam? So then we're saying we're condemning people based on, well, you have the obligation to go search the internet. The internet is full of confusion. The deen is mateen, is firm. So even when we're looking at tafsir al-Qurtubi, you have to know how to navigate that stuff. The teachings and so on and so forth. But what never causes any doubt at all with regard to understanding the Quran is the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The way he dealt with his enemies, the way he dealt with his family, the way he dealt with his friends, his companion, his ibadah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that causes no confusion at all. And so that has to be the point at which you come back to. I mean, it's serious. What we're talking about is serious, because we have people that will interpret a hadith, ayat of the Quran, and chop heads.
I heard one confusion, hadith that makes confuse people. It's a hadith, and I don't know the Arabic part of it, but it says that if somebody steals an egg and their hands get chopped off. But the explanation was that he may start out with little stealing and then may end up with the bigger stealing and then end up getting a hand chopped off.
That's why in the beginning of the da'wah, in the beginning of the da'wah early on, there was a clear distinction between how you teach the people. There was limitation on teaching hadith. Not that hadith is wrong. It's not that. It's that you have to have a basis. You have to have a basis. You have to have the foundational point. So the Quran gives that foundational point. Then you slowly introduce the hadith that are not mushkil, that they're not open to different understandings, become problematic. So then, because people deny the sunnah, because they don't know how to deal with the sunnah. They see a hadith that has a problem, automatically, this can't be true. No, that doesn't work like that either. That's the opposite extreme. The one group, they take the stuff extremely literally. The other group is so skeptical, they don't accept. No, it's because Islam is knowledge. It comes in stages and degrees. And it needs work. It needs work. And that's where we started off from, that majority of us as Muslims have no strong relationship to the Quran from the Arabic language or from the Qur'at or from all those other elements. So we're really illiterate, you know what I'm saying, in that regard.
One other thing that was mentioned in the lecture was that Christians, the devout Christians, they go to their weekly Bible studies and they have their book and they have like earmarks and all those highlights, and they know. Is it easier to read Bible and understand than Quran? I mean, if somebody asks me what is Surah Baqarah, I mean, what about? I mean, I can give a little bit of explanation, but it is.
No, it's not. It's not easier. And imagine they're doing that with a translation. They just have a commitment. Those are translations, right? I can pull up the Arabic like I just did and go to the original source and sit. Even something like this, right? For instance, here, when you look, now we went to the last ayah, which is, that Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala, we asking Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala not to make us of those who He's angry with or those who are misguided. So part of it is the ghadab of Allah. So then when you look at something like this, linguistically in the Arabic language, ghadab, it means intensity of feeling. Right? A man who is ghadub is prone to anger. And then there's other meanings for it. So, and then you can read the Arabic clearly. So it's not that it's us. The Christians, they can't read Hebrew, they can't read Aramaic, they can't read Greek. Those are the languages which their book is in. And even if they could, there's only an elite in the whole of the dunya that can access that. That's not the case with us. That's not the case with us at all. And the amount of tafsir of the Quran, whether it's in Urdu, forget it. Because Urdu has whole libraries, as far as that is concerned. English has way less, but still has enough stuff to be able to function. But it's the Muslims.
So you're saying it's like the knowledge is there, but we are not.
Yeah, the knowledge is there, but the knowledge is there, but the concern is not.
You mentioned about those Christians, it's like they don't have, only elite have access. What do you mean by access? It's like
They don't have access to the original manuscripts and stuff like that.
they don't have the manuscripts.
No, they just go. They have that devotion to study based on the translation. That's the translation that they're using. And study tools. Huh?
Anymore?
Huh?
Those like original text, like
That's something that is like, it's like, imagine something that's so obscure and rare that there's only a few professors in the world that can deal with it. That's how they are with that. That's how they are with that. The Muslims have the distance that we have from real Islamic knowledge. Yeah, the khutbah becomes the source of everybody's knowledge. Unless you have something else going on, some study or some program that you're in. But the khutbah right now, for the majority of the Muslims, is the source of their knowledge. And the khutbah is not a source it's not really supposed to be a source of knowledge. The khutbah is supposed to be inspirational, but we make it a source of knowledge because we know that the Muslims are not accessing. And this country is more problematic because there's an attitude and a mindset of not studying in this country. That's why personally I say it. People look at me strange, but I say I give 20 years. I question the existence of Islam. They say, whoa. Yeah, I question the existence of Islam after 20 years. Because, first of all, there's a lot of things that come up with this. Most majority of the Muslims don't have any experience with praying 5 times a day in Jama'ah. So that's a number one shift away from really how we practice Islam. Second, the issue we talked about, the issue of the language in the Quran. Third, the basis in the actual Islamic studies. Fourth, most of the Muslims are doing well in education but have no grounding in Islamic sciences. So what they're learning is really has nothing to do with Islam. And so they formulate their ideas off of those types of things, that they learned in school and this, that. And that causes a lot of doubt for them. It causes a lot of issues. And then here, this country, the culture, it has a massive impact. And it's constantly changing. And unfortunately, it's been changing for the worse. The popular culture, especially. It's been changing for the worse, and it creates a lot of issues for us. That's not to say that it's not global, because it's global. So you have to look at all of those factors and the detachment from the masajid, the irrelevancy of the khutab, the lack of proper training of the imams, the absence of enough ulama. So when you look at all of those factors, that's where you start asking yourself, like, well, so what's the future? What's the future look like? Which is very different than the Muslim world. We may consider the Muslim world to be backwards on some issues, but some things that they're not backward on. In a place, in a halaqah like this, in the Muslim world, it's not uncommon for there to be in a masjid like 20 people, 30 people, even after Isha, even after work. It's not uncommon. The culture is different in that regard. Not to say success is in number, that's not the point. But what I'm saying is that the culture and the environment is different. Right? The higher level of knowledge too is different. You have ulama that have been studying for years. Right? And so they understand how to navigate. They understand that there's different opinions. They understand how to navigate. And so the situation is different. So that's part of the issue. The dalleen is to act. Is part of the characteristics of those who act and worship without knowledge. Maghdubi alayhim is those who have knowledge and don't put it into practice. Forget about the issue of the people of the book for the second. Go to the core of the message.
We can apply this to ourselves.
Yeah, apply it to ourselves. And so then the issue of the core of it is deviating in belief, either because of lack of knowledge or lack of practice. It's very dangerous. That's why I was saying that issue, understanding hadith properly. It's dangerous. Some of us who converted to Islam, we waste 20, 30 years. I know an older brother, he's been Muslim for years now. And he almost cried. It's like, I destroyed my family. I know an imam. He's an imam now. And he said, when I came into Islam, I was so hard on my family. It was, my presentation of Islam to them was disgusting, that type of thing. Even I never forget, even when I first began to reach out to the Muslim community, I went to a store and I just wanted to talk to the brother. And he was so harsh on me. Even the day when I went to take Shahad in the masjid, the brother screamed at me when I came in the masjid. What do you want? Like that. It's like looking at him, because I was studying to be a priest, so I had religious orientation. So I was like, what is this?
Since you have experience from the other side as well, it's like, is that typically with Muslims, that's how we treat the other people, or it's like the other religions also similarly?
The Jewish community is closed off, but it's known, it's like they kind of is a closed off community. But but the Muslims have that issue. We do a lot of da'wah effort, myself and a couple other imams in Puerto Rico, because that's where our community is from, and the one of the things that was told to us, they say, ustedes no son amalgados, like you guys don't look bitter in your faces. Every time we see because usually they say Árabe to point to the Muslims when we see them. And the culture is not like that. The culture has problems, but the culture is very, even when they did the protest stuff, it was all involved music and this, that, because that's how they are. And so, but the bitterness and the coldness is there. But that's a sign of people that are oppressed. When people internalize oppression, that's what they do.
But Islam doesn't preach that.
No, Islam doesn't.
So what is the reason? It's like it happens all over the world. It's like in the third world especially. It's like we have seen these kind of cultures. Is it just because of oppression? Or?
At a certain point, there's a choice, but in general, there's an oppression issue. Lack of opportunity, fighting hard to get opportunity, fighting hard to survive. And it makes people tough and rough. It's not 100% an excuse, but there is an excuse there, right? And so that's why I was saying that's why I was saying we have to understand the hadith in its proper place, because we're going back to this hadith, and they say, oh well, this is the people of the book, and I said, is it irresponsible of me to present that in a masjid and just say, well, okay, and that's it, knowing how we are as a Muslim community? You know what I'm saying? Knowing that teaching can create an issue. No, we have to, we're at a point where we have to have boundaries, but we also have to know how to navigate and how to deal with people that we have to. We, especially in today, that's why I said, what is our contribution back? What is our contribution back to the society, back to other people? What is the contribution, like what is our function in the world as Muslims? If we don't have a function in the world, and sometimes, look, there's been people, just by the Muslims not even talking, just by the interaction. I went to high school with this person. Just by the interaction, the people take interest and they change. Just by the interaction. No tabletop da'wah. I'm not knocking that, but no tabletop da'wah. No trying to convince you. No arguing back and forth. None of that. One of the most effective things right now, and that's part of a lot of what's here in Surah Al-Fatiha at a certain point, is at the end is how do we deal with our own situation and the point of da'wah. One of the most effective parts of da'wah in today's time is just showing people brotherhood and kindness. Let them be. That's part of the argument here, that guidance comes from Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. That's part of the thing that was being discussed here. Is not totally from people's efforts. There's a combination, effort and from Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. But the Ummah has been charged with bringing some sort of goodness into the world from the angle of the deen. Just dealing with people in the most effective kind way. With la nuridu minkum jazaa wa la shakura. We don't want reward from you. No, we don't want to be thanked. It's from sincerity between our covenant with Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. Whether you come into Islam or not, that's the difference between us. And when we do relief work, that's a principle we should have. And I practice that. If I'm going to help you, I'm not going to help you with the condition that you come into the religion. I'm not buying you in your time of need and oppression, not twisting you, putting you under the pressure like that. See what I'm saying? That's not, because we have the principle, la ikraha fi din. There's no compulsion in the deen. So the more that, you know, the more that is the approach that people take, they try, and we have that problem. We have changed as Muslims because we think money can buy loyalty. We think money can buy people influence, this, that. That's a non-Muslim way of thinking. That's not an Islamic way of thinking. The Muslim way of thinking is that, you know, through the manifestation of good character and sincerity, that goes a long way. Sure, money is used to influence, no doubt. But that's not the core of what, you know, that's not the core of our practice. Sure, money is used to influence, to do this, to do that. We understand the political game. But that's not our deen. And you see that. Some of the Christian groups, if you're in need, they'll be there. They'll walk you by the hand. But the whole time is, come in. You know, and to the point where it's like, that's what's happening now. You got to realize this. When I'm saying these things, because it has a connection with refugees, Muslim refugees. Imagine Muslim refugees in boats on the ocean. You know, the ocean has sharks and all of that type of stuff. Makeshift boats going from one place to another. You're leaving a land in which your own people, you're at war with them. And there's geopolitical stuff. But then in the midst of all of that, all of a sudden people come to help you. They're not coming to help you with sincerity. They're coming to help you with an ulterior motive. They're not respecting your humanity. You see what I'm saying? And that's what makes people, you know, that's what makes them bitter or this, that. You know, that's the difficulty. In Islam, no, people have rights. The poor have rights no matter who they are. We don't use that their situation to, you know, we have mu'alafat al-qulub, but mu'alafat al-qulub in zakat, you know, to soften the hearts, that's someone that already has showed interest. Or to the situation of creating a friendly environment. That's where the influence comes in at, but it's not trying to buy people.
I was about to ask you about
Yeah.
So they have to show some interest, then only we could use that one.
No, we can use it. We can use it to better our relationships, but that's the thing, is that we don't want to get caught in the political, in the way that the way that these political orientations do this stuff. Even the way other religions do this stuff. Because they have created a mess in the dunya. They have created a lack of confidence in deen. You know, because there's a selling of the religion. Is a business thing to make money. You understand what I'm saying? And that's not too much different than I go to Macy's or whatever store and the person is smiling in my face to get the sale. Yeah, that's not the type of persuasion that we want for people. We want them to have the experience of Iman. You know, it should transfer from us to them. You know, I believe it transfers. When there's sincerity and goodness, it transfers. When people see you're sincere and you're not trying to use them or you're not trying to force them, it transfers. Then they have to make the choice. Because that's a journey. That's a journey they have to take. Can you imagine you obligate somebody to the deen? You know what I'm saying? That's a journey that a person has to take for themselves and the transformation. And we ourselves are on that journey. That's why we're asking Allah, Ihdina as-siratal mustaqim. We ourselves are on that journey. Sometimes we don't even know if we can make it to the day. You know, we're on that journey. That's the most important thing, is just to be open with Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, even with our shortcomings. And ask not to be led astray or those who gain the anger of Allah. But that's why I mentioned that point, that I want to close on that note, that that Dr. Qazvi Zalat, he said that apply the Quran to yourself. Apply it to yourself, struggle with yourself, use the Quran as a mirror for where you want to be, as a gauge. And it's true. The sectarianism, the animosity between people, that is reached a level of destruction. We can't continue that process. We can't continue that. Imagine every country going in that route. We have Muslims here that are economic refugees, whether they want to admit it or not. They wouldn't be here if the economy in their countries was in a better situation. They're only here as economic refugees. And they're taking shelter in a place to live. It's a survival issue. Yeah, sure, fine, you have the nice house, the this, the that. But really, that wasn't the core. The core was leaving because the situation was not suitable to be able to have a dignified life. So we have to remember that type of. And when people come into our environments, how do we deal with them? And that's the fine line of the human being.
Don't they also associate a lot of them with the churches? The first interaction is with the churches in a lot of cases.
With the refugees? Yeah, but I was talking about just even the professional groups. They're like refugees, forced out. Not really wanting to be in these types of environments, but having to have a better life for the kids, for the family, for the cousins, for whatever, taking, they have a commitment to the village, whatever it may be. There's a lot of Muslims like that. A lot of brothers that are like that under that pressure. But the political refugees, yeah. The political refugees, the political refugees right now are in a situation which is extremely precarious. It's like unstable, because those religious organizations have contracts with companies, cheap labor. So they bring them in, like Catholic Charities and others. They bring them in, but they have also agreements with companies so that they come in on labor. And in some cases, sometimes I'm not going to say necessarily Catholic Charities, but in some cases, some of these groups, they separate them from the Muslim community. And they put them in geographical areas where they separated from everything that they know. So that breaks them down and they begin to change. That happens quite often. It's just that we don't talk about it as a community, but we've seen those examples. Whether it's the Bosnians first went into Ohio, that's what they did. We had to search them out, the community searched them out. Then they disappeared.
I have one story that, Tablighi Jamaat, the missionaries were helping refugees. They were taking them here, there, and one day Tablighi Jamaat showed up and they dropped.
Tablighi Jamaat has a long record with that. Aside from any differences of opinion there may be between the groups, the Muslim groups and Dawah, they have I've dealt with them for years, and they do. That's a good quality that they have. They will search out and try to bring the groups, those groups in. But that's the situation of the Ummah. That's why I mentioned that, because that's the situation of the Ummah now. And you have to realize that trickles down to the third generation, second generation. So now you have these Muslims in France and England and this and that, the US, and they're children of some sort of decision that was made at another time. That's part of the Ummah. We're mostly talking about the ones who are trapped in migration patterns, why they're trapped into that. But we have to give people the tools to navigate. We have to have the tools to navigate that. Yeah, you can't live in a society forever and say it's us against them. That's, you know what I'm saying? You can't be, it can't be that for an eternity unless they're open, hostile enemies. If they're open, hostile enemies, that's a different ballgame. It is a us and them situation because now you're talking about existence. Your existence is under threat. That's the complicated part of living in these societies that we live in. Because in part, from some angles, it looks like they're hostile enemies, and from other angles, they're not. You know, that's it. We have to be open with that stuff. If we're not open in understanding our situation, how we deal with reality, we'll never grow. We'll never survive. We'll, you know, and it's not just about surviving. It's also about growth. But it's not only about growth and accumulating money. It's about how we develop ourselves as a Muslim community, as an ummah. And what happens when the staff hits, you know, is actually a Christian saying. When the staff hits the leader, you know, the group splits apart. And so that's what has happened to the Muslims. The staff has hit, boom. Now the Muslims are scattered throughout the earth. Now the question becomes, how does the leadership respond to ensuring that the Muslims continue in their growth and in their existence? I don't know if you guys get what I'm saying. You know, when you go to a new place, you have to think, you're going to a new place, you're a stranger. Different language, different culture, different food. Where's the masjid? This, that, you know, different reality. So after a while, you begin to change. You begin to change. So how is that change taking place within yourself? How is that growth, whatever that growth may be, how is it taking place? Is it taking place at a point where it's allowing you to better yourself and your deen? Or is it such that you find yourself just lost? And that's really the responsibility of the masajid. That's really the responsibility of the masajid. One example from the Jewish community, I actually want to close on this point. I wanted to close before, but one example of the Jewish community, I read this example years ago. It's actually a two-part example. One was during World War II, when the Jewish community was under assault, some of their rabbis and the activists in their community, they would try to pressure the U.S. to allow them to come in because they had concern for them. The other example was that in some cases, when their leadership saw that the community was under assault, they switched up the education, the orientation, the organization of the community for the sake of the growth and the survival of the community. I just don't see that discussion in the Muslim community. The Catholics, why do you think Catholics have hospitals and schools and this and that? Because they were not accepted in the society. And so they built their own institutions, right, with that purpose in mind. Right? But still, even with having their own institutions with that purpose in mind, because they were not relevant to how they functioned in the society, their children still went astray. Their children still lost out. Their children, you see what I'm saying? And so we're in all of those phases. We, like the people of the book, we're in all of those phases. We have people that are under attack, under assault. We have migration issues. We have economic issues. We have these institutional issues. You know, you send your children to the school. They may not be accepted. And with the progression of time is kind of getting a little worse.
On top of that, we are not opening any hospitals or any schools or anything like that. We are not working anything.
Because the philanthropy, we haven't gotten to that level of understanding philanthropy and building for ourselves. People are on the level, this is what we talked about, the change that takes place in people and how they grow. They're at the level of being the millionaire, the quarter of the millionaire, this, that, for themselves, not for the group. And because they're that way for themselves and not for the group, it's questionable how long their wealth will last, you know what I'm saying, within the context or the framework of Islam. It's not contributing anything back in the real sense. Even our masajid, our educational institutions are like that. Our educational institutions are the least funded. Even our imams, the same thing. You got to realize, like, a rabbi a chaplain, there's 6-figure salaries. Why? Because those people, they're supposed to have a certain level of dignity so they can have leadership. They make the community move. But when you undermine those types of things, you can't move. You really don't have a solid voice. And that's not a part-time position. Those are not part-time positions in leadership. But the educational systems too. Islamic schools struggle. They struggle. So that's the thing. The thinking is not correct. It needs vision. That's what it needs.